Wait, what was this used for?
For the
Oh, for the funeral, yep. So,
They got
yeah,
clean
that's where
everything,
all our
go
stuff
down.
went.
Oh, okay.
You never know.
Yeah, just never know.
All right, so we shall get started. I see each of you here. Just wanted to give out a prayer request before we start. Talked to Brittany Watkins last night, and their little boy has a health issue. I'll just say that. Has a severe health issue that they've dealt with for quite some time. His name is Brighton. I hope I've gotten that right. Briton. Yeah, and they just, this little fella goes through a lot. Of course, as parents, they go through a lot watching him, and I got to pray with him one night. It was so special, and I mean, it was middle of the night. He was crying. He said, "Thank you." And I just melted, and I'm like, oh my Lord. Just comfort that little boy, because he couldn't sleep. He hurt. So just keep praying in prayer, because I told Brittany I would share that with you all. I don't even know what that's like to have a child that's sick. All right, well, we're going to open up in a word of prayer, and also keep praying for Dave and Brittany. So there, Brittany, if you're watching. All right.
Dan or Dave?
David and Brittany Watkins. All right. So let's open up in a word of prayer. We have kind of a lot to get through. So, Miss Tiff, will you open us up in a word of prayer?
Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this beautiful day.
Mm.
Thank you for your love and for your care for us. Thank you that we can come together and give back just a little bit back to you, Father. You deserve so much more. And Father, I just want to praise your name for how great you are, Lord. And I thank you for this little boy, Brighton. Father, I don't know the situation, but it tears at a mother's heart as well as I'm sure the father's heart too. And Lord, I pray that you comfort this child and heal him up, Lord. You do not know what's going on, but heal him up, Father. You know. And I just thank you for bringing me in today, for making me start healing up myself, Father, so that I could come back again. And I thank you so much for that. And I thank you for the services yesterday for Austin's family. It was a wonderful day in your house. And heal their hearts and give them good thoughts, give them good memories of Marsha, Father. And comfort them and give them strength and peace, Father, as we go through the healing process. I just pray this in your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
I've seen him, I had like lifting my through somebody.
Let me see this real quick. Hold on a second. It's creating all kinds of.
Mike fixer ever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm excited about that. Okay, if I can figure this out. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Packer.
It's just been that kind of day.
That's a double whammy.
And let's clip that right there. It was getting all kinds of static from your sweater. All right. Have a wonderful time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All righty then. I was going to snuggle up against him, give him a big smooch, but I thought better of it. So. He just was so cute, and he smelled so good right there. I'm like, oh.
You had that right.
Okay. All right, so I hope this lesson makes sense to you today. Because, I mean, I've given God all kinds of other ideas for Sunday school lessons, but he didn't like any of my other ideas. And this one came up during devotions, and I'm telling you, I just am always so amazed by how when I read God's word, how if I'm not in a hurry, if I don't do my 5 verses or my chapter just to get through it and say, check mark. And I've just learned it's better for me to read 3 verses and mull over it and think about it, let God speak to me, than it is to do my check mark. And so that's what happens often. As you know, some days my devotion is honestly the same 5 verses as it was the day before, and maybe even the day before. And it's kind of, that's what it's been this week, because I'm just like, God, show me. I don't really understand this. I don't really understand. And then I throw things off my husband, and he like looks at me. Sometimes I feel like he looks at me like, why do you even think of that? You know, but it's just, and I'm not a deep, that's the thing. I'm not a deep thinker at all. I'm a very surface, shallow thinker, whereas most times I just take things for what they are. I don't really, my husband mulls over everything in life and thinks about it and ponders it, and I just do life. But for some reason, when I read God's word, it's very different for me. And so I just challenge you, if you are doing the, I just need to check mark, if that's where you're at right now, I get it. But try to move past it fast, where you are just like, if I'm reading the same 5 verses 3 days in a row. I mean, and you know what you're doing, you know if you're just fluffing it, yeah, or if you're just like, God, this is amazing, but I don't understand this. Help me to understand. And you reread it, and you reread it, and you reread it. Jen?
I just think that for me personally speaking for myself, the more that I read it, the more it seems like it's more important to me. I know it's like more important to me than just reading a regular book or something, because sometimes I'll read it, I'm like, well, that don't make sense. I'm just going to have to keep going back or forward, because I've been doing that with the little scripture writing thing. I started today or yesterday reading the whole chapter instead of just those 4, because I was like, that don't make sense. Wait a minute.
Yeah. Sometimes it helps with those scripture readings to go back and look at the title, what the verses are all centered around. That helps too. All right, we better get into this, or I'm not going to finish. Somebody took my clock. All right, so this lesson today is, how did I get here? Have you ever been in a spot in your life, and I'm kind of talking like not a good spot, where you just stop and you look at your life, you look at where you're at in life, and you think, how did I even get here? Like, how did I get here? I was here. How did I get here? And we're going to read about Nebuchadnezzar. Usually when we read in Daniel, we read about Daniel. We're talking about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Another neat thought on that is why does God have Daniel refer to his friends in the book of Daniel with their Babylonian names, but Daniel's Daniel? You know, he's not Belteshazzar. And it's just like, why? You know, and we even had a guest preacher sometime that referred to them in their Hebrew name and not their Babylonian. But my husband pointed out to me, God had Daniel, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but like I was like, you know, maybe we need to be, you know, maybe it's not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, but he said God had Daniel put them in the Babylonian names. So I'm not going to change what God did, you know, so I don't know. All right, so you can tell my mind is just, all right, so let's read Daniel 4, 28 to 33. King Nebuchadnezzar must have wondered, how did I get here when he was eating grass like oxen do? And we're not going to even get everything that brought him up to eating grass. And when I say he was eating grass, like seriously, the man was eating grass. But we'll read that. Yep, Daniel 4, verse 28. And we'll kind of fill in the blanks. We'll go backwards a little bit. Chapter 4, verse 28 through 33. All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked into the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? My. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. Verse 33, the same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. Yeah, the man was changed into a beast, but yet had the human mind, like, I don't know what animals think. We just don't know, but I know King Nebuchadnezzar, he was, it was just like he was a human, only he was a beast. And imagine eating grass and stuff. So, how did that mighty king end up with claws and feathers? We're going to find out.
At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes into heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. I had it that he had kind of lost his mind and ended up living out there with the beasts.
I don't really have an answer for that. You mean instead of being
Yeah, instead
cognizant?
of being cognizant like
What
a
are
man
your
would be,
thoughts?
I was thinking he kind of lost his humanity, his mental health, and lived as a beast until such and such time, and God gave him back his understanding.
I tend to, because is there something that points to that?
Verse 34, and mine understanding returned unto me.
And I bless the Most High.
Where was the kingdom is to and they shall divide it.
Is it that he didn't have understanding, or he actually got it? It actually clicked. He actually was
That
ready to
could
give
be-
his
that
life.
could
I don't know.
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. And see, two separate ways of,
Physical or spiritual.
yeah, two separate ways of thinking about it. We don't know. That's why it's so wonderful to dig. But I love the question.
I need
No.
to dig.
And you still may not have a for sure answer. But we can know, because to me, like, the punishment is so great if you know what's going on. That's what I'm thinking is
Yeah.
like he had all that time, I think it was 7 years, to think about, right? 7 years? To think about what he had done that led him up to this point. So, but you may be correct in thinking that because it said mine understanding returned. I think, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, I think he had an understanding of what he was supposed to do back here, and we're going to go there, and that his pride got in the way, and he did what he wanted, and it bent his path.
Yeah.
So, good question. We're going to go to Daniel 1, 17 to 21, because I really would have loved to read all the chapters, but we just don't have the time. So I've kind of pick and chose, and the ones that say recap, I'll just go over. But in Daniel 1, 17 to 21, it says, as for these 4 children, which was Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Because if you'll remember, they became captives, and they wanted them to eat of the king's meat and of the king's table. And the keeper in the jail, let me see here, because Daniel found favor. Verse 9 of chapter 1, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs, because they were supposed to eat of the king's meat, but that was meat that was offered to idols. And in verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So here are all these captives, and you've got 4 boys that say, oh no, we're not supposed to eat that. This is not okay. Well, usually in prison you do what you're told, right?
Yeah.
But Daniel had purposed in his heart. There's a lesson right there. He had purposed in his heart that he wasn't going to do it. And because of how he had purposed in his heart, then God brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So he's like, just give us pulled some water, so vegetables and that kind of stuff, and water, and don't give us any of that meat, and just do it for, what do you say, 10 days? Yep. In verse 14, so he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. Verse 15, and at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children who did eat the portion of the king's meat. So God blessed it. You know, God said, you know what, Daniel and the other three, they're trying to obey me. So he gave him favor with the prince of the eunuchs to even allow it, because they could have just been killed, for saying, I'm not gonna eat of the king's meat. And so then we have in verse 17, the king saw the hand of God upon Daniel. In verse 19 it says, and the king communed with them. Okay, so he communed with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, so he was drilling them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. That's pretty amazing. So here's the first part. We have Nebuchadnezzar, because remember, we're focusing on Nebuchadnezzar and not Daniel and his pals today. The king saw the hand of God upon him. He must have been like, whoa, all my astrologers and magicians and all that. And yet here's some kids, because they were young, here's some kids that aren't even eating all the good stuff, but they are like 10 times sharper. Like put me and Tiffany together. Tiffany's probably 10 times sharper than me.
Not by a long shot.
So, it's just like the king did, and he drilled him. He purposely, you ever drill somebody, like you want to find out something, and you purposely ask, I'm notorious for this, you purposely ask questions with a purpose. That is what the king was doing, and he was going to find out, because probably they were going to get in big trouble, either, say, okay, you have to eat the meat. You're not going to do your own thing anymore, or you just get killed. And so, but God had it all worked out for them. So that was the first point. The king saw God's hand here. Daniel 2, 1-5. Anyone want to read that?
I will.
Okay.
And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans to shew the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my dream was troubled to know the dream. Okay. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Sirach, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. You said 5, right?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your house shall be made a dunghill.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, he's serious. So point number 1, the king saw the hand of God upon Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And point number 2, the king has a dream, and he calls upon all his magicians and astrologers, and he very firmly tells them, I don't only want you to tell me the interpretation of the dream, I want you to tell me the dream. Okay? And so the next line is a recap. Daniel in chapter 2, verses 6-13. I'm just going to recap it for us. So the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, they tell the king, no one can do what you're asking. They said, just give us a little bit of time. Well, this just blows my mind, is that the king, he tells them, and I should have wrote the verse down because I really do want to read it. he said, when they say, okay, let, well, I can't find it. Anyway, the king says, I know you're fakes. And this is what blows my mind. I turn to my husband and I'm like, why does he even have them then if he knows they're not true? Because he tells them, you're gonna just, here it is, verse 8.
Verse
The
8
king
says,
answered and said, I know of certainty that you would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. He knows he's being snowballed by these guys. You know, and I'm sure there was some where they could do some of it, because I believe they were, you know, being used of Satan. Okay, so I think there was some of that, but for the most part, he knows they snowball him. And here they are again, and only this time he actually says something. He actually says, yeah, you want more time so you can make things up, or I'll tell you the dream, or, you know, and he's like, not happening. And I asked my husband, I said, why on earth does he even keep these guys around? And he said, the people. It was a way, and this was good, it was a way to keep the people in check, because there's something about magic and mystical that people are like, ooh, you know, and so they listen and they
Something
paid
don't
attention.
understand.
That's exactly, that's good, Donna. They didn't understand it, so they listened to it. So, but the king knew, So I just thought that was amazing, you know. So he's like, well, you're going to tell me the dream and you're going to interpret, or I'm going to chop you up in pieces. You know, yeah, so. And then another recap is the next one, Daniel chapter 2, verses 14 to 45. Again, I wish we could have had time to read all this because it is such good reading. But Daniel finds out, because here they're coming, they're like, okay, because they said, well, we can't do what you're asking. He's like, fine, you're done. That's it. I'm not going to let you snowball me. You're done. So gather up all the magicians, the Chaldeans, the astrologers, everyone, all the wise men, and kill them. So they come for, in verse 14, I believe it is, they're coming for Daniel and his friends. And Daniel's like, whoa, what's going on? And they tell him what's happened. You know, my thought was the king, back up in point number 1, the king saw the hand of God on Daniel and those 3 boys. Why didn't his mind go to that? You know, and seriously, like, anybody have any ideas? Like,
I think it was just God's time.
yes, it has to be, because, like, wouldn't you remember 10 times smarter? Those guys were 10 times smarter. That kind of stuff, it seems like it would stick in your head. But I do think that God, you know, he just has this going in a certain sequence and a certain order, and we just have, you know, have to trust him. And sometimes when we're reading and we're digging, the whys don't get answered. And it's okay, because he's actually given us everything we need. Just kind of fun to chew on the rest.
Kind of like step by step. Here, we'll start here, tell you this, and then go to this, and then go to this.
But
When
as,
you read something and it doesn't, it doesn't even come into your brain, even though you just read it. And a month ago, after that, you read it, wow,
Yeah.
this is fantastic.
and that's why it's the living word, because every time you read it, we get more and more, we get something different, not anything contradictory to what we, you know, but it's like a little bit more light is shed. A little bit more light shines on it for us, and we can see a little bit more of the picture. It's just amazing. So that recap is Daniel finds out what happened, and he asked for time to ask God to show him the dream and the interpretation. He asked his 3 friends, he says, pray for me. Now, mind you, it's Daniel that does the interpreting. He's been the one that's given, because in verse 17 of chapter 1, it said, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Okay, so he is the one that's at the forefront, you know, and so he says, you got to pray for me, though. You know, this is big stuff. A lot of people's lives, including ours, depend on this. And he does. And God shows him not only the interpretation, which he, of course, needed, but the king's demanding the dream as well. And so Daniel could tell him all that. And then in Daniel chapter 2, verse 46 to 49. Would anyone like to read that?
I'll read it. 46, 49. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an obligation and a sweet odors unto him.
Freeze. Read that again.
Did I read it wrong?
Nope.
Okay, I just didn't want to.
Nope.
Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel.
Right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
How did I get here? How did I get eating cattle or eating grass like oxen and have claws and feathers? It doesn't say you worship God.
No.
And when I read that in my devotion the other day, I'm like, bingo, there you go. And worship Daniel. You know, so then it's like, well, and I may be out of order here. It's okay. Worship, when I look it up, is, and it's down in the green, worship is bowing low while lifting up. Okay? And it's assuming you bowing low and lifting something or somebody up. Worship Daniel. There's no other way to interpret that. He worshiped Daniel. He's like, whoa, you just not only told me the interpretation, you told me the dream, which I was demanding, that nobody else could tell me. Okay, keep reading.
That was when he said, well, stop.
So,
Sorry, that was fun. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he said, okay.
it's Shadrach. Yeah.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king.
Yeah. This is amazing to me. He worshiped Daniel. You know, sometimes, and this is what I say to somebody I talk to often, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's like one of my favorite sayings because there's so much truth in it. You know, it's amazing to me, and we can look under here, the bullets under here. Here's where we see the path bend for Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 46 tells us that the king fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel. He commanded that oblations and sweet odors be offered to him. Where else in the Bible do we hear that?
Jesus.
When they're doing it to God.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. When they're doing it to God. And here the king is, but what's the pecking order here? Why did King Nebuchadnezzar choose Daniel? God is above him. Daniel is below him. So it's the root, it's one of the things that always gets us. It's pride. His pride would never, you know, and the thing is that in verse 47 he says, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods. And mind you, he said, your God.
He didn't say his God.
It says, your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal the secret.
So he didn't even know.
You know, my husband said, Daniel probably he probably told him about those oblations and that stuff, that he didn't even want it, that it wasn't him. Knowing the character of Daniel, I don't think he just let them do that. But the king, he wanted to be at the top of the totem pole. He didn't want to say, oh yes, I'm going to answer to God. Because here's the problem. In verse 47, we see that the king recognizes who God is. However, in his pride, the king worships Daniel instead of God. He has seen Daniel worship God. So he knows what he's supposed to do, who he's supposed to be worshiping. But instead, he chooses to worship Daniel instead. Worship means worship. Worship means the king bowing low and lifting up somebody up. But in his pride, he's only going to go so low. And that so low did not include bowing to a God that would be higher than him. Because in chapter 3, the next bullet, The king makes his image of gold, commanding that everyone bow down to it or be cast in the fiery furnace. This is where in my devotions that I was like, whoa, how did he get here? This was actually the starting point. And then I'm like, wait, he was turned into a beast too. And so I'm like, how did he get here? But this was the beginning point. How did he go from up here, where he is understanding, oh, God's a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, to recognizing that, down to making an image? Well, the Lord showed me after I was like, Lord, show me, help me here. Help me to understand this. What's the disconnect? How did he get there? And the Lord showed me, it was that phrase, and worship Daniel. And that's how he got there. So our thing is, he was not worshiping God. And we can apply this to our lives, and we're all gonna, if you haven't had, and I'm sure you have, if you haven't had a how did I get here moment, you will, but you've probably already had it. And I said earlier, if you do what you always did, you get what you always got. Sometimes we are so silly, and I want to use the word stupid. Sometimes we're so stupid because we do things that we know are going to get us here, wherever here is to you. Just think of your bad spot. And we, unknowingly sometimes, but sometimes we're just outright rebellious too. It's our nature. And we have to constantly, ask the Lord to bring us into check. We worship other things. Mm-hmm. And most of all, we worship us. And that's a hard truth. But anytime, and we've talked about this before, anytime I choose anything over God, I'm worshiping something else. Mm-hmm. I'm lifting something else up, and I'm bowing down, and not to God.
I've heard pastors say this before. When he preaches and just different things, he'll say, "Don't put your worship me or you praise me and think it's me, that it's God." Every time you compliment him, I've noticed that too. That he says, "No, that was God, not me." You see them. He may not phrase it that way, but that's the point I get when he says that to me when I said things to him. And I think that's a lot of us though. Like we try to worship people and things they do, and this person's so great, but really, we don't know what's in the heart.
Yep, that is so true. And I will tell you, because I just had this conversation with somebody, is that we're going to fail you. So don't ever put Pastor and I up on a pedestal, because we will fail you, I promise. It's not that we want to, it's that we're human. Yeah. And we make mistakes, and we've made mistakes, and we will make mistakes in the future because we're not perfect. So don't look to us like that. You can have mentors, and that's great. But understand that mentors, shepherds, are still human.
Yes.
Right. And we do our best. So there has to be a great level of mercy and grace that we have to have for each other. Not saying now we need to respect pastor as pastor. Yeah. That's definitely very important. But we always do tell people, don't put us, because we've heard some, and there have been some name great preachers that have fallen bad because we're all only one decision away from ruining our lives, ruining our testimony, ruining, what others think about the Lord. Just one bad decision away. And so, we always have to keep that in mind.
Sorry, I had to say that.
No, that's okay. And I wanted to say that about, looking up to Pastor. I look up to Pastor. He has a wealth of knowledge of the Bible. It's amazing what God gives him in counsel and stuff. Sometimes I sit there, I'm like, where'd you get that? And he'll say later, I don't know. It's just but that's God, so, and that's what, it's a particular thing that God, I believe, does for his man, for the pastors. He gives them insight, that he doesn't give the rest of us. And that's why it's so important. You hear him say, I know this is a rabbit trail, but you'll hear him say sometimes, or other pastors, visiting pastors have said, ask your pastor for counsel. You know, sometimes people think, well, I'm older, I don't, you know, he's younger. It doesn't matter. That has nothing to do with it. If Devin were to step in, be called of God and step into the role of pastor here at age 20, however he is, 27, yeah, then it would be the same way. God gives what's needed. Corey's a young pastor, and he's got people in his congregation that are much older, but God gives something special to the man of God. So anyway, but you know, we cannot get in these bad spots in our life and think, we do, how did I get here? When we trace it back, we can, you know, God will show us where we went wrong with it. But be careful what we're worshiping. You know, so the lesson is kind of, first, my excitement in how God just points out things, you know, like when we ask, you know, show me what was the connection? How did he go there? You know, I asked God, and guess what? He gave it to me. That's pretty exciting stuff. If you never have God answer any of your prayers, the small ones, then get closer to God. And of course, we should all be trying to get closer to God. But if there's no communication, if he's never whispering stuff in your ear, you know, and saying, oh, Julie, did you see that? And worship Daniel. That's it. That was his disconnect. That revelation to me is that's a living word. And so it's exciting for me, and I want that for everybody. Second of all is understanding that he worshiped Daniel and that we worship people and things, and we shouldn't. Our jobs, our finances is huge. So many people just worship. And we say we worship God, but anything we place above God, okay? God gives us certain commandments. This is nothing new to you, but we all need to hear it. I need to hear it. I need to say it so I can hear it. Anything I put above God, makes me worshiping that. So when God gives me specific things in the Bible that I'm to do, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, okay? So many people tell us we don't need church. I can worship at home, but it's direct violation of God's word, okay? Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, the tithes and offerings. It's a direct command from God. On these commandments, when I obey God, I'm worshiping God. That is the purest form of worship, is our obedience.
Yeah.
I was thinking, can you think of anybody in the Bible besides Nebuchadnezzar who, you know, did his image of gold and then ended up also as a beast for 7 years, that they would have been in the spot? How did I get here? I was thinking of Judas. Did he ever think, how did I get here?
When he sold the information for the money to where God was.
Yep.
That was the one that come right out when you
Yep.
said that.
Is that, you know, he got in such a bad place and he went out and hung himself. But how? And we know everything is God's perfect will, and we understand that. But he made decisions. Is there anyone else you can think of in the Bible?
David.
King David.
He went his own route, and he knew it was wrong to not go to battle. He knew it was wrong to look on another man's wife. He knew it was wrong to commit murder.
Yeah.
And he finally came to that point. How did I get here? But I know I sinned against God.
Yep.
And
But you know, he couldn't have been walking as closely to God at those points where he made that, because I don't make the bad decisions when I'm walking intimately and closely with God. I make them when I start to pull away, when I start to do my own thing. That's when I make those bad decisions. So, you know, and thing about Nebuchadnezzar is, you know, he wasn't even saved in the beginning. It's awesome because he does end up, I believe, turning to the Lord. You know, he says he gets the understanding, you know, and then everything is restored to normal and he's not a beast anymore. But just stop and think about who you're worshiping, what you're worshiping, who you're elevating above God, and understand that it leads us somewhere. I want to worship God with all my heart. The singing this morning was really awesome. Pastor and I are like frazzled this morning. I don't know. We just don't have it together this morning. But I was running to get papers, and the singing caught my ear out there. It was so worshipful. It was just so worshipful. And I would say that of Friday nights. I missed Friday night because I wasn't feeling well. It's so worshipful as we turn to God in prayer and as we make our requests made known on Him. But we also can worship Him just by praising Him, just by obeying Him. So let's worship God, and let's dig in our Bibles because He just shows us the most amazing things. All right, Miss Peggy, would you like to close us in a word of prayer?
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you